Thank you for standing by. At time, all participant lines are in a listen-only mode. After today's presentation, you will have the opportunity to ask questions over the phone, and you may do so by pressing star then 1 at that time. The conference call is being recorded. If you have any objections, please disconnect now. I would like to introduce your host for today, Ms. Irene Skricki. Ms. Skricki, you may begin.
Great. Thank you very much, and welcome everyone to our FinEx webinar today. Our topic is debt collection stories and resources. What I'm going to do initially is to just run a few slides describing FinEx so everyone's in the same place, and then we'll go into our topic for the day. So first I want to note that we do our standard disclaimer, which is this presentation is being made by CFPB representatives on behalf of the Bureau, but it does not constitute legal guidance, interpretation, or advice from the Bureau, and any opinions or views stated by the presenters are the presenters' own. And I think probably most of you on this webinar know who we are, but just a word of introduction. CFPB is a relatively new federal agency whose objective is to help consumer finance markets work by making rules more effective, consistently and fairly enforcing those rules, and empowering consumers to take more control over their economic lives. That last part about empowering consumers, which is what our CFPB Financial Exchange is all about and what this webinar is about today. We both educate consumers, we also do enforce and supervise and study as part of the work of the CFPB. Just quickly, so you know kind of where financial education sits in the Bureau, we have a division that does consumer-facing work, so not our regulatory side or market side, but our consumer-facing side. And within that division, we have several offices. One is financial education, which is where FinEx kind of sits, to educate and empower all consumers. And we also have special population offices, empowerment, older Americans, service member affairs, and students. In addition, this webinar in particular, we're doing jointly with Consumer Engagement, which is the office that both reaches out to consumers and manages our digital properties. So we are delighted to be doing this together with them. Again, to let everybody know what FinEx is, in case you're not on it, if you get a regular monthly email saying FinEx news and updates, you are FinEx. If you do not, you may want to join. We are essentially a network of organizations and different types of entities that are doing financial education, and the CFPB shares our materials with that group of financial educators and tries to get ideas and thoughts and feedback back through surveys and meetings with financial educators, and then also helps to connect financial educators to each other. And so to date, we have over 2,000 people who have signed up for FinEx. We do regular convenings again. This, I believe, is our 22nd webinar. Almost all of them have been recorded and can be listened to if you want to catch up on previous topics on our web page. And I hope if any of you are not in FinEx, you sign up. I'll show you how in a minute. We have a resource inventory that describes all the different tools and resources for financial educators that's available online as well, all of which can be found at our Resources for Financial Educators webpage. The URL is consumerfinance.gov/adult-financial-education. Again, it's not the catchiest URL, but it is that will get you to our page, and that's where you can see both archived webinars, and you can see all the different tools and resources that the Bureau has either here or through links through that page. So I want to encourage you all to use our materials as appropriate. And then just quickly, we also have a LinkedIn discussion group on financial education. If anybody wants to join that, there's information up on the slide. You can also find it on that adult financial education page. And there we post our resources. You're also welcome to post your resources, thoughts, whatnot. So open invitation to everyone to join that. So that's my usual information on FinEx. I actually realized I'm just going to quickly go back because I accidentally jumped over this slide and putting this one up because it shows you how to sign up for FinEx. At the bottom, you'll see, for those of you who are looking at the WebEx, it says to sign up, email CFPB_FinEx, that's FINIX, at CFPB.gov, CFPB_FinEx@CFPB.gov. And that, again, many of you already know that because that's where you're getting letters from, but if anybody wants to sign up, just send an email there. We'll put that up again at the end of the webinar. So I am very excited now to turn to our topic for the day, which is debt collection stories and resources. We have a very interesting couple of presentations. The first thing we're going to do is hear from Leslie Parrish from our Office of Research Markets and Regulations, or Division of Research Markets and Regulations, who will listen on the findings of a debt collection survey. And secondly, we will hear from Kristen Doan in the Consumer Engagement Office, which will tell us about some of the debt collection stories that we've heard from consumers. We're actually going to do something new today. We're going to show you a couple of short videos that are actual consumer stories, which I think will be fun to listen to and helpful. And then she will also talk about some of the resources we have to help financial educators who have clients who are dealing with debt collection issues. Then we'll open up for questions. I'll just note, if you have any burning questions or clarifying questions, you can use the Q&A function on the WebEx to let me know. I will be monitoring that, and if necessary, I can jump in and ask your question. Also, at the end, you can use that, but then when we break for questions close to the end, again, the operator said you can ask voice questions, and we'll give you additional instructions at that time. So, with all that, I am going to turn this over to Leslie. Leslie Parrish, thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
So first I want to give some background on debt collection before we dive further into some details. We estimate at the Bureau that more than 70 million people, about 1 of every 3 U.S. consumers, were contacted by either their creditor or a debt collector seeking to collect on a debt within the past year. And creditor or debt collector, because banks and other original creditors can choose to collect their own debts when they go unpaid, or hire a third-party debt collector to do so. Now, in addition, creditors may also sell a debt in collection to a debt buyer, and that buyer, in turn, could either collect on the debt, hire another debt collector to do so, or sell again to another debt buyer down the chain. And I say that there are around 6,000 debt collection firms operating in the U.S. currently. To the next slide. In February, we released a report called Consumer Experiences with Debt Collection. It's the findings from a survey where we asked consumers whether they had been contacted about a debt in collection by either their creditor or a debt collector, and it had details about that experience. So some of the things we asked them about were the type of debt that they had in collection, whether they owed the debt they were being contacted about, and if so, if the amount the collector said they owed was correct, what sued, how they be contacted by their creditor or collector about the debt collection, and just how they felt about their interactions with creditor or debt collector. We also collected information about these consumers' demographics and financial characteristics, like their credit score and income. And at this slide, there's a link that will take you to a page on our website where you can download the report and an infographic that summarizes some of the key findings. Findings in this report are nationally representative of all consumers with a credit record. And that's because we used the Bureau's Consumer Credit Panel to get a sample of consumers who are contacted to participate in the survey. The Consumer Credit Panel is a random, de-identified sample of credit records from one of the big credit reporting agencies. The drawing our sample from this panel had the advantage of allowing survey responses paired with credit report information, so we're able to get a better sense of the consumer's full financial picture. The survey was conducted between December 2014 to March 2015, so about 2 years ago. And if you want to take a look at the actual questions we asked, the full survey instrument is in the appendix of the report that you can download. So getting the findings, first we found about a third of consumers, 32%, were being contacted by a creditor or a debt collector about a debt in collection over the past year. And it was still for these consumers to say that they were contacted about more than just one debt. There's a pie chart breakdown on the slide, and you'll see that 57% of consumers with a debt in collection said they've been contacted about 2 to 4 debts, and 16% of consumers with a debt in collection were being contacted about 5 or more debts. Consumers who reported having a debt in collection, what type or types of debts they were being contacted about. Also about both loans, such as credit cards or student loans, as well as due bills, such as bills for cell phones or a doctor's bill. So on this slide, we're looking at a breakout of different types of loans consumers with one or more debts and collections that they were contacted about. And as you see, credit cards were the most frequently cited, and followed by student loans. Loans to assets, such as a car loan or a mortgage or a home equity line of credit, are next, and that was followed by payday loans. Next slide. The breakout of the different types of past due bills consumers with one or more debts in collection have contacted about. Bills are most prominent, followed telecommunications bills, and those include things like phone, cable, or internet bills. And further down the list, you see bills for utilities, for paid taxes, or some sort of legal judgment, and then rent. And some consumers that had a debt collection said that they had actually more than one debt collection, as we saw before. They may have cited multiple types of loans or unpaid bills, which is why these numbers add up to far more than 100%. From that, we asked consumers who said they were contacted about a debt collection whether there were any inaccuracies about one or more of these collections. And specifically, we asked these consumers whether more of these debts was something that they did not believe they owed, whether it might be owed by a family member instead of them, or whether they believed that it was their debt, but the amount that the creditor or collector was attempting to collect was wrong. So these stories aren't fairly mutually exclusive, since the consumer who doesn't believe they owed the debt may also know that it's a debt owed by their family member, so then they would check both of those options potentially. Or they've had different issues with multiple debts, since many of these folks had multiple debts and collections. Overall, just over half of consumers, 53%, with a debt collection, cited at least one of these issues. Now, with this, we later asked consumers if they actually disputed a debt, their creditor or debt collector, for these reasons, and far fewer reported actually doing so directly to creditor or debt collector. Next slide. 15% of consumers with a debt in collection say they had been sued in an effort to collect on the debt. Most of the time, these consumers reported that they did not show up for the hearing, with just a quarter of consumers who were sued reporting that they did so in our survey. Some of the findings I wanted to highlight today. The report goes into more detail on these and other findings. If you're interested in a closer look, I'd encourage you to download it from our website, and I'm happy to take questions later on the report as well. Thanks very much.
Great. Very much, Leslie. And again, if people have any immediate questions, you can use the Q&A function. I'll just note a few of you have already asked if you can get the slides sent to you. We usually do that. If you email the FINEX email address, we'll send a PDF of the presentation. Again, that email is cfpb_finex@cfpb.gov. So I see that later on the screen. So if you want that, just email that address, and I will send it to you. Okay. Now we've a little bit of background about debt collection and some consumer experiences around that. Now we're going to turn to Kristen Doan from our Consumer Engagement Office, who will talk about our debt collection stories and some resources related to that. Kristen, you're on.
Thanks. So I have collected a couple of stories in debt collection. The CFPB has, everyone has a story section of our website, but this specific set of stories relates specifically to debt collection, and we collected these to help illustrate consumers' experiences as they work through debt collection issues. They consumer stories where they said that they were pursued for debts that weren't owed, felt they were contacted too often, or felt threatened by debt collectors. The story I want to share with you is Denisha, and I can play that story now.
Sure. In just 1 second, I have to switch to a screen share, so you'll see a couple things flash by here. But if you all just hold on, I will switch over to Denisha's story. Here we go. Okay.
I attempted to pay for my car loan as much as I could with the money that I had from unemployment. Once my unemployment check ran out, I wasn't able to pay for it anymore. So it became delinquent and it was sold to a debt collector. Several debt collectors began to call, but I wasn't able to set up any payment plans because I didn't have any income. There were a few that were calling and making threats. I had one that was telling me that I was going to jail. And that she was a detective and they were coming to my house and I was going to go to jail for carnapping. I was terrified to hear threats like that because I'm a single mom, and to hear that my freedom could be in jeopardy of me not being able to see my son for any amount of time terrified me. No debt collector should threaten me with jail.
Now I am going to just pop back to the PowerPoint. So thank you.
We can just switch to Bernadette if you want, Irene.
I'll go straight to Bernadette. Okay. And now we're going to show you a second one. Story. Let me just get that in screen.
I had taken out the payday loan just to have some extra cash when I was facing a little bit of hardship, just for high car repairs. And that seemed as though it was an easy fix. It turned out not to be due to the high payments, which led to the problem. My name is Bernadette, and I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I had been contacted by a collection agency. They had initially called my work. Shortly after that, they contacted my dad, my two sisters, and one of my friends. They had said they had a legal complaint in their office, and they were looking for information as to my whereabouts, as they would be going to the district court to file papers on this matter. That was the first time that I had received a phone call. It was very overwhelming for them to contact my family. I didn't want anybody to know of this personal matter, not to mention that when they contacted my work, I cannot receive phone calls for personal matters. The debt collector wasn't very helpful. I found out about the CFPB by going online. Once I submitted my complaint, it was pretty much an initial response, and the original company that the debt was with had reached out to me with a resolution in which I no longer had to deal with the collection agency that was harassing me. The collection agency did invade my privacy by reaching out to my family and my friends and leaving my personal information on their answering machines. Dealing with financial matters can be really stressful. You do not have to face it alone. The CFPB is there to help you. You have the right.
I'm just going to say, you have the right. Here, let me play that.
Right to fair debt collection practices.
Okay. Sorry, this is super sensitive, and it heard me hit that before I did. Let me go back to the PowerPoint. Thank you for bearing with through that. So we heard Denisha's story and Bernadette's story. And now I'll turn it back to Kristen to tell us a little more about those stories and how others can participate in this process.
Sure. So anyone, if you had any issues watching those videos, if they froze up for you at all, we do have a collection of them on our website, and the links to their pages are included in the PowerPoint when you get that later. these consumer stories, the more we hear from people, the more insight we gain into what's happening in the financial marketplace and how it is affecting everyday people. And these shared experiences help us inform how we work to protect consumers and create a fairer marketplace. We hope to collect more stories from people and also intermediaries that work with those people facing these issues, and we need your help to collect some of these stories. Thinking about what makes a story, we want people to be able to tell the story however they feel most comfortable. Currently, all of the stories on our website, good or bad, are no interviews, but they don't have to be. We can share written stories with or without photo, but do help connect real people to the news, good or bad, and we know that privacy can be a concern. So we'll work with people on how they feel they can be telling their story. The photos don't have to include faces, and we can also share stories through quotes or audio recording. As you see in Bernadette's story, she wasn't comfortable with video, but she did like photography, so we used photos and put to video, but it could also just be a written story with photos embedded on the webpage. So if anyone is interested in submitting a story to the Consumer Protection Bureau, there's a link on this slide here, consumerfinance.gov/apd/tellyourstory, and for you can submit some of the details. Once you collect stories, we can then look through them and reach out to anybody to work through the details on the story.
Great. And Chris, before I advance the slide, can you just a little context on what we use the stories with? I know for this audience, people may want to show these to their clients who then may feel like they're not so alone and may have options to get help. There may be other purposes. You want to just give people a sense of that?
We want people to feel like they're not alone. No matter what they go through with finances, there are tons of other people who have these same issues. And by sharing these stories, it shows people that they're not alone, they're not the only one. And in addition, what we've done with these new debt collection stories is that we've added resources to each of their pages. So on that page, we have a couple of questions from our Ask CFPB FAQ database that relate to someone who might have similar issues. We also share some of the data points that align with her story, as well as other things that people can access from CFPB that might help them work through a similar issue. And within our 5 collection story pages.
Next slide. I just want to say a few people have used the Q&A function to mention that I guess the video froze. It didn't hear, but it must be something about the transmission.
Yeah, it did.
Okay, that's interesting because it's here. So my apologies again. You can see them all on online. Also, we'll just everyone project who's speaking. I guess there's some sound quality issue for a few people. That's not. I hope that's not most of you. Let me go to the next slide.
Resource that we also created recently was the debt collection portal page. And this is a work in progress, but the first round of this page, we used our Ask CFPB questions to pull together what we felt worked best to give people an overview of what they might have in debt collection, learning how to work through it, understanding key terms, common issues they may face, and how to take action to solve their problems. And done by a few key sections. We have get started, understand your situation, and take action. And then we also have a link to CFPB where we have all of our debt collection questions in there. And they're found at www.consumer-tools/debt-collection. Next slide.
Okay.
Portal page, one of the featured items are our sample letters that people use if they're not quite sure how to respond. We've got letters that someone who might need more information want to let the collector know that they do not owe the debt. They might request for contact to stop, or while they dispute, to contact their lawyer, or to specify how the debt collector can contact them. These letters are legal advice, but they are helpful to help consumers if they're not quite sure how to proceed. consumer complaints. So if not solve their issue, they can go to the consumer complaint database and submit the complaint, and the CFPB will work to forward the complaint to the company and work to get a response from them. That can be found at www.consumerfinance.gov/complaint. On our debt collection portal, on the right side of the page, there are links to print resources, which are Know Your Rights when a debt collector calls, and to act fast if you can't pay your credit cards. These two-page documents have some quick information and tips for consumers that you're welcome to hand out to them, and we also have links to those from the debt collection portal page.
Jump in here. This is Irene. These are also things you can order off of our website. There's a link to an order site. You can find that on that Adult Financial Education page as well. And you can actually order some of these resources in bulk. So if you wanted to get them to hand out to your clients, you can print them yourself, but you can also often order them. Slide, Kristen? Yes?
Yep.
Okay. Great.
Turn back to you, Irene.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you, Kristen and Leslie. That was some great information. I think between the study, which gives us some insights into to some degree, the extent of people who are dealing with debt collection issues, and probably all of you who are financial educators are seeing at least a little bit of that in your work, I would guess. Then the stories, which between the two you saw, at least saw part of before the screen wasn't working so well, or more, and we urge you again to think about those potentially as resources to share with the people you work with, so to potentially share stories yourself or have your clients share stories, and the resources we just saw around Ask CFP, the debt collection portal page, submit a complaint, and some of the handouts and sample letters. We hope that's a start in helping you deal with what I know can be a difficult issue for all of you who are working with clients facing these issues. So for those who screen, I did put up the CFPB FinX address, CFPB_FinX@CFPB.gov, to either sign up for the email newsletter for FinX, or to ask for the PowerPoint deck, or ask any other questions you might have. And I just put up the URL for the Adult Financial Education URL, where you can find all of our financial education resources, and also the LinkedIn group name is up there as well. So let's turn to questions. I'm going to let the operator tell you how to ask voice questions, and then once he's done that, I will start to read some of the Q&A WebEx questions that have come in. There's been actually a number of them here. So, operator, you want to give instructions on voice questions?
At this time, if you would like to ask a question over the phone, please press *1. Please unmute your phone and record your name when prompted. If at any time your question has been answered while you're waiting in queue, you can remove your request by pressing then 2. Once again, that is *1 if you would like to ask a question over the phone.
Okay, I'm going to ask a couple of the questions that I see here, and then we'll see if any voice questions come in. First, I think this is for you, Leslie. What year or when was the for your survey instrument survey data? What was the consumer data collected? 2014, she asks, or what was the year is that from?
Yeah, so it was collected over a 4-month period. It was collected between December 2014 to March 2015. So people were responding to the survey about 2 years ago now.
Great. I'm going to read a few of the other questions that I'm seeing. I think some we either may not be able to answer or may refer people to the website, but we got early on, collectors allowed by law to attempt to obtain money on debts which have expired under the statute of limitations or have been written off. There's an answer to that in our Ask CFPB questions. Is that correct? Either Kristen or Leslie?
Yes, we have an error or a question that addresses statute of limitations in Ask CFPB. It's question 1389. So if you go to consumerfinance.gov/askcfpb/1389, what is the statute of limitations? You can see that some of those answers reflect, it's a little bit verbose to read through, but if the statute of limitations has expired, a court can still work judgment against someone if they don't raise the statute of limitations as a defense. And in most states, debt collectors can still attempt to collect the debt if the statute of limitations has expired and try to get you to pay the debt by sending your letters or calling you as soon as you do not violate the law while doing so. But you are able to dispute that. A lot more details to that answer on Ask CFPB.
Great. Thank you, Kristen. The operator, do we have any voice questions yet?
We do have one. Larry Wick, your line is open.
It seems that under the Fair Debt Collection Practice Act, consumers are blocked by high filing fees to go in court, subsequent litigation costs. And even when they get that far, to try and recover $1,000 for the violation, the collection agencies hire lawyers, which can make it so much more expensive to litigate than just to quit. In my experience, many have quit. What can be done about that? PB.
Leslie, do we have an answer to that, or is that something we would need to look at some other?
I'm not entirely sure I understand the full question. Certainly and look for details regarding any kind of work to what the Bureau can do as a whole.
Our Congress seems to be hostile to consumer rights, and short of a change in the statute, is there anything that CFPB can do about that?
That's a question we can answer on this webinar. If you want to email that question to CFPB_Phoenix, I can see if we can get an answer, but I don't think we can directly address that with who's here on the phone.
Okay, so be it.
All right.
I don't know the right people to answer that. I don't think we have those details, but we can certainly put you in touch with someone who can.
Right. Okay, I'm going to read, I'm going to take one more written question, and then we'll check again for voice. And it's actually more of a note, but I'll share this. Just wanted to be sure that employers are in no way required to respond to a request for information from debt collectors. Is that true? We may have an Ask CFPB question on that.
Yes.
I guess, are employers required to respond to requests for information from debt collectors? I think the person's saying that they're not, and actually Courtney, who's also in the room here with me, has the Ask CFPB question open. Do you want to read it to us, Courtney?
Yeah, so we have a question on Ask CFPB. And this one is a debt collector called my employer looking for me. What can I do? And the answer we have on the website is that if a debt collector calls your employer, you want to talk to the person who took the call to find out what the debt collector said. There are strict limits about what debt collectors can say or ask about you. A debtor generally may only contact other people to find out where you live, what your phone number is, and to verify where you work. A debtor may not tell your employer that you owe a debt. If the debt collector has told your employer that you owe a debt, you may want to speak to an attorney about your rights. And that is Ask the CFPB question 1409.
Great. Thank you, Courtney. Leslie or Kristen, anything to add? I assume probably not.
No, that's great.
Okay. Any other voice questions before I go back to the Q&A ones?
We are not at this time, but once again, *1 if you would like to ask a question over the phone.
Oh, so I will read another question from here that's been sent via the Q&A function. CFPB respond to complaints in reference to other government agencies, for example, Veterans Affairs. Can I answer that? What we do is we refer those complaints on to other agencies. We don't directly respond, but we have arrangements with other regulatory agencies.
That's correct. Our consumer response team does forward any complaints that come through that are not related to the Bureau's work, and we forward them to the agency that does work with them.
Actually, people are answering questions here in the Q&A thing, which is great. Thanks for the help. Let's see. Here's one for you, Kristen. This is kind of interesting. I'll paraphrase a bit. Were there any sort of positive stories or communications about collection agencies that tell our stories we've collected? Has anyone seen a positive video, or is the sole focus agencies that don't follow the rules?
We actually reviewed a number of stories, and we reached out to ones that had been confirmed that the consumer have a relationship with the company they were talking about, and we did not get very responses. I understand that people may not want to share their story. The ones that we shared were the only people that had agreed to have their story told on our site. So we didn't target any specific type of story. We just asked for answers related to the topic that we had gotten.
Great.
And if I could add a little bit of color to that from our report findings, we found, people had a variety of impressions about their contact with their creditor or debt collector about a debt in collection. So on one hand, that a little over a quarter of consumers with a debt collection said they felt threatened. Over a third said they thought they were called too early or too late in the day. Nearly two-thirds said they were contacted too often. On the other hand, you had over half of consumers with a debt in collection that said their collector or creditor gave them accurate information about the debt. They provided options for paying the debt and treated them politely. So we kind of a range of experiences.
Great. Thank you, Leslie. Let's see. I think we made an answer to this question I'm about to read in a blog we did recently, I think. But the question is, what do you recommend for employees, I guess this must be an employer perhaps, that get balance billed for medical care? Our insurance carrier says they do not owe the amounts. I know we had something on our blog recently about, I think, Medicare billing. I don't know if anyone, any of the speakers on this call can answer that, but Leslie or Courtney, do you have a response to that? Otherwise, I may have to take that question separately via email and see if we can get an answer.
We have a blog on January 18th about what to do if you're wrongfully billed for Medicare costs, and that blog goes into some steps for consumers. They can tell the provider or debt collector that they are enrolled in the QMB program. They can call Medicare. They can have, if they have a problem with debt collection, they can submit a complaint. The blog is on our website in the data section, and I can share that link if that's helpful to people. But that's some questions related specifically to Medicare costs. The question?
To the extent that we are able to. Let me see. Oh, there's all kinds of interesting things coming in here. Let me read a couple of other ones. You're a group full of questions, which is wonderful. Do you have any information about the limits of garnishments of employee pay, I guess, related to debt collection? Leslie, do you know? And Courtney is also looking on CFPB.
Debt collection portal. We have garnishment in the key terms section, and we have a quick overview of garnishment there. And I'm not sure if our question at CFPB has a little bit more of an answer. I'm looking up real quickly.
But they're in the debt collection portal that addresses that. That's great.
It's a quick definition of garnishment. The question was related to
limits, I guess, of I don't know how, when that can be done. I'm reading into that question. Go around that.
I think we have information about those limits, but because I think state and federal laws that have certain limits, so it might depend on the state that you're located in. If you do look at Ask CFPB question 1439. There's a little bit more information to debt collection and garnished wages.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Let's see. Someone else has noted here that wage garnishments limits on wage garnishment are based at the state level, so it would depend, if this person is correct, it would depend on where you live. All kinds of. Someone asked if I could share the questions. I don't think I can actually do my screen, though I would be happy to. I'm getting lots of interesting things here. Let me see. Oh, answers. One person says Debt Collect Improvement Act limits garnishment to 15% of pay for all debts. Someone as an agency can request 25% of net income, but other obligations will be paid first, like child support. It sounds like this is a complicated question, and probably anyone who has specific questions about their own situation or situation of a client is going to need to someone in their state who can kind of answer from a legal perspective. I'll just address one thing a few people have asked again. Yes, participants can receive a copy of this presentation if you email the CFPB FinEx inbox. We'll send out a PDF to anyone who requests it. Again, CFPB_FinEx@cfpb.gov, or any other questions you get. They come to me, and I will. I'm happy to kind of pass them on.
So we have question 1439, consumerfinance.gov/ask-CFPB/1439. It talks a little bit more about garnishment of bank accounts or wages, and it goes into, stuff that state and federal laws have limits or exemptions that apply to bank account wage garnishments. It has a little bit more information than the definition of what is garnishment. And I did post the link. I don't know if everyone can see it. I did post the link in the forum.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let me see. I think there's at least one more voice question because someone asked about that. Operator, do we have additional voice questions?
We do have two more additional voice questions. The first is from Percy Lowe. Your line is open.
It's great first time on here, but my question is this. I find debt collectors always violating the law just as well as the government law, and they haven't been licensed or bonded or something been registered according to the state to collect in the state they're trying to collect in. And when you put this into the CFP, there's nowhere in the drop-down box when doing a case with the CFP where you can indicate that, help get them removed. I get this all the time. In a consumer state where you have to be bonded and registered, and I have a list of all the registered debt collectors who can work in the state of Texas. So I can't. And one is just killing my client, and he can be removed. I posted everything, from voice messages and all, showing that they're in the wrong. Why them removed from the Area Equifax and TransUnion? They don't like to cooperate.
Hear about getting a report on their credit report removed?
Yeah, I have clients normally have a debt collector trying to collect. That's their credit report, and the debt collector is totally wrong because they're not registered or bonded and not the correct way with the state of Texas. So they can't collect it. So they shouldn't be a credit report. When I post it on the CFPB, all the records show that Equitrans Union or Experian never removes the debt. That's wrong. Violating the law.
When you file a complaint, you mean? When you file a complaint with the CFPB?
Yeah, I file a complaint with the CFPB. I upload everything. I even go to the state of Texas debt collector's website to prove that this company can't collect in the state of Texas. They're violating the law.
We have a number of Ask CFPB questions related to credit reporting, and some of them do touch on what you can do to dispute any errors in the report. If you send a state in a credit report from a credit reporting company, you can take a dispute not only to the credit reporting company, but also directly to the company that is the source of the information. However, there are certain types of disputes that companies are not required to investigate. Look at Ask CFPB question 14. It has some of those details about the details your dispute letter should include.
Yeah, but with a debt collector, you don't need a dispute letter. you need to call a creditor's validation letter. That is inside the law for debt collectors. The Collection Practice Act says they got to follow the law inside the creditor's validation letter. They got to validate the debt, know if they can collect on it, and do it. So if they can't validate the debt, it's supposed to come off the credit report from Experian Union, and they don't take it off.
Yeah, I don't know. We may have to pass that question on to others here in terms of what I know the Bureau works closely with states, but I don't know if we are actually monitoring in any way to see whether, my guess is we're not, to see whether a debt collector is registered within a state. It may be beyond what our consumer complaint function does. I'm not sure. So if you want to email that to me, I can see if I can get an answer on that, but we probably can't.
Okay, so what is that? What is code number again? 1340 what? Did I get it up? She said 1340 something.
Oh, happy an error on my credit report. It's CFPB question 314.
That's probably not. I don't think that's going to get quite a
I'm not trying to dispute it. But there's no need to dispute when the debt collector is in the wrong. That's actually inside the law when you go to the C. When you pull the actual FTC law they have for debt collectors with the Fair Collection Practice Act, it says it's a law. You validate the debt before a debt collector pick it up. And a list of things they're supposed to be able to do. If they do the list of things, then the debt collector automatically has to be removed by Experian Equifax and TransUnion. That's automatic in the law. It's written in the law. And to be either registered or whatever the state say, if you collect in that state, you have to follow that state law, or you can't work in that state. I watch it all the time in later Texas. You can Texas without certain things, and I can all the time. When I upload the whole everything, when when you go in and you say debt collector, and then you a part where you can upload all your supporting documents, all that is in there. I got cases right now with case numbers not solved.
We may have to address that offline, but thank you for sharing that. It sounds like there's a lot of issues in that one. But thank you, Percy. Yeah. And again, feel free to send an email to Finex Box if you want to follow up. So.
Okay, I'll be glad to do that.
Okay. This verification of debt is one of the statutes in the complaint database, so we can try to put you in touch with someone from Consumer Response.
Okay, actually, I see a lot of things y'all are truly missing. That it be inside the CFPB, that it really solves the problem. Actually solves the problem. Y'all missing a whole lot when it comes to debt collectors.
Yeah. Okay. That's
one to solve the whole problem.
Okay, sharing that, and feel free to email further.
Okay.
Let's see. Operator, take the next voice question, and then again, there's all kinds of interesting discussions going on here. I'll try to get to as many as I can, though we are short on time. Was there one more voice question, Operator?
So we have Trish Savage. Your line is open.
Oh, I was curious and wanted to piggyback on the question about the survey. How many people did you survey, and how did you reach them? I hope you haven't already told us that. And I missed it.
No, great question. So we a sample of a little less than 11,000 people using that consumer credit panel. Received 2,132 responses. Then the reporting agency was able to pair the responses with information from those consumer credit records. So we had a fuller picture of the people that responded, and I think importantly, people that didn't respond to the survey, because in surveys just generally non-response bias is a huge issue in trying to parse out what your findings, your responses really mean, and if they're representative. So since we knew, one that was selected to receive survey, we were able to weight the responses that we did get to make nationally representative.
Okay, so how did you choose the people to receive the survey from the consumer credit panel? I'm not sure what that is.
So the CFP has a data resource called the Consumer Credit Panel. Basically, it's a sample of consumers with credit reports in the United States. And so we were able to draw a sample of consumers with credit reports. We sampled people that in their credit report showed up that they had some sort of debt in collection, so we made sure that we got enough responses from those consumers. And because we wait the responses on the back end, we could make the findings nationally representative. But one thing I will say, since we could see people's credit records and their responses, is we saw a consistency with people that had some collections that were reported on their credit reports that did say, in fact, I do have a debt in collection. So that was one of our concerns as well during the survey. Are people going to accurately report whether they had a debt in collection? It's a sensitive topic, but we found a lot of consistency with what people were saying that they had in terms of their financial situations and what we could see on their credit report.
Okay, so who actually request their credit reports, the CFPB has access to those that have been requested? And
no, sorry. So we have a database that is a collection of de-identified credit report information. So we can see, for example, what is the overall indebtedness level for people on student loan debt, or what share of people have a delinquency on credit records, things like that. So we can going on kind of at a broad meta scale of people's financial health. So we use that resource to select a sample of people that we would then survey.
Okay, so just to make sure I'm down right, you sent out 11,000. You got response from 2,100.
Right, roughly 2,100, 2,132. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Sure, and if you want a little bit more detail on that, if you download the survey report, Section 2 goes into kind of what our sample design looked like, how we operationalize this, some more information about the consumer credit panel, what the weighting looked like, and how we adjusted things to make sure it's nationally representative.
All right, we'll do it. I thank you very much.
Yep.
Thanks, Lee. Let's see. There seems to be another one specific to the survey, so I'm gonna ask this question that came in over the Q&A function. Did consumers respond, I guess, to the survey regarding specific debts or debt collectors or creditors, or did they just respond to general questions which may have related to a variety of particular debt collection experiences?
The answer to that is both. So we asked people about any debts that they had in collection over the past year. So nothing, no experiences that were example from 5 years ago. These are recent experiences. So we asked them generally about those debts over the past year that they had been contacted about. But there were a series of kind of more specific questions about the debt they were most recently contacted about. So for consumers that were only contacted about one debt within last year, those are the same thing. But the people that I was showing you that had maybe 2 or more debts in collection, we were specifically drilling down on those recent debts that they were contacted about. So there's a survey that relates to both.
Great. Thank you, Leslie. Let's see, almost out of time. I want to note, I think people can see there's a number of questions. Actually, a lot of people have been responding to each other, and I think everybody can see that if you look at the Q&A function. So there's some proposed answers to some questions that you all have been posing, which is actually quite interesting. I'm going to ask one more that I see here that I think is fairly general, and then I'll check to see if there's any other voice ones, and then we may be out of time. And I can find it here, which is that is it recommended that people dispute a debt through the debt collector first, debt collection agency, or through the credit reporting agency? Any thoughts on that to my presenters? Just dispute it with first, debt collector or credit bureau. And I don't know if we have a specific answer to that, but if anybody has thoughts on that, my presenters initially, or if we have a question.
I think, if I remember correctly from looking through a number of our asked questions, if consumers doing this outside of the complaint process, it would be both, right? You need to on both ends to make sure everything was moving along. I don't know offhand if we have a question that directly relates to that.
Right. And for the questions people are raising, of course, we would, we don't give advice directly, so you would also want to consult any kind of legal help you might have. Our information is meant to give you information so you know what your options are, what you're dealing with, but not specific guidance. Let me just check. We're right at 3. Let me ask, are there any more voice questions, operator?
We do have one more.
All right, I'll take that as hopefully our final question.
Percy Lowe, you're open.
I'm gonna backtrack to the one was just asked. You always dispute the collector first. You knew a dispute with the credit bureaus first. The easiest way to get something what you call a frivolous dispute. You dispute the collector's ability to validate the debt first. According to the Fair Debt Collection Practice Act, do it. Go through the process.
Someone just asked, could you just introduce yourself and where you work, if you're willing to do that?
Okay. Yes, my name is Percy Lowe, and I'm actually a credit expert. I studied credit for 14 years. Worked with several companies where I went to a credit university to learn how to deal with the credit bureaus. Actually worked with the credit bureaus and left and formed their own credit university to teach people how to fight the credit bureaus. And when the CFPB was formed, I spent 6 years just reading everything I can on the CFPB, what they're capable of doing. Going on, it's a lot of things I do when it comes to consumers is dealing with the original creditor or the debt collector first. You deal with the credit bureaus until you got factual information, and that meets both your federal law and your state laws. The state laws just as well. And they're not collection companies out here who do the state law. They always send dispute letters in when you shouldn't send dispute letters in. So what you can say is a credit investigator will go out and investigate things before I tell them to do dispute letters.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. So we're a little past time now. There are some other thoughts and things floating around. I found some in the chat function too, as well as Q&A. So if anybody has something we were not able to get to today, you can email me or at CFPB FinEx, that email address I've said a few times, or obviously in cases where it's very specific advice around, specific cases and clients and all, you may actually need to seek sort of legal help in some cases or other expert help, as we have to, a little limited in what we can say. But thank you very much. I hope this was useful. I hope this gives people some ideas about resources or things they can turn to. Encourage people to share stories or have your clients share stories to access all of our materials. And again, if anybody, and the report that Leslie described is online along with the portal that has some of the different information we described. So, and anyone, again, who is not part of FinEx and wants to be part of these webinars in the future, we have one every month, fourth Thursday of the month. Email CFPB_FinEx at CFPB.gov, and we can add you to the list for that. So thanks, and a lot of energy around this topic and a lot of great questions and a lot of stuff I wish we had more time to get to, but I think we will close down now. And thank you very much, everybody, and thank you very much to my speakers for sharing with us today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Irene.
Thank you for participation on the conference call today. At this time, all parties may disconnect.